This month on 219 West, where in the world is Occupy Wall Street? A movement that started north of the border is now going global.
A deeper look at what protesters think about the now international movement.
Everyone understands this. Everyone around the world understands this because they're affected. I mean, the economies are globalized.
When voices turn from songs to shouting, protesters tread that fine line between lawful assembly and disorderly conduct. And when they find themselves in the back of that police van, legal observers are there.
How does Occupy Wall Street compare with other social movements, and how will it really affect the economy and the upcoming elections? We'll talk with two writers covering different aspects of the debate. I'm Bianca Seidman.
I'm Samantha Stewart.
I'm Małgorzata Wojtunik.
I'm Erica Robinson.
And I'm Judy Lee. Welcome to 219 West. We'll have those stories, plus a look at how some immigrant businesses are struggling while others are thriving. And we'll see how temporary shops are popping up all over Manhattan. We begin here at Zuccotti Park, headquarters for Occupy Wall Street. Adbusters, a little organization based in Canada, started it all. On July 13th, using social media like Twitter and Facebook, they launched a New York City campaign to Occupy Wall Street to protest economic inequality. On September 17th, about 1,000 supporters kicked off the occupation of Zuccotti Park in Lower Manhattan. Just a week after it began, Occupy Wall Street received national attention when New York City police maced protesters. About 80 marchers were arrested. On the same day, rallies spread to Chicago and Boston. On October 1st, demonstrators marched across the Brooklyn Bridge. More than 700 protesters were arrested. From California to Maine, the phenomenon took hold of cities across America. Unions joined Occupy Wall Street on October 6th.
We're the crane guys. We're the guys that cleaned up 9/11.
The protests also caught the attention of President Obama and Mayor Bloomberg.
They're trying to take away the tax base we have because none of this is good for tourism.
In California, news spread of police brutality at Occupy Oakland. Confrontations with police escalated, protesters were tear-gassed, and more than 100 were arrested. Over 600 communities in the United States continue to rally. This map only touches on the occupations of the Western Hemisphere. Later, we'll take a look at the other side of the world.
Going into its third month, Occupy Wall Street has received international attention, both positive and negative. But what about protesters themselves? What do they have to say about where the movement has been and where it is going?
Millionaires pay low taxes, so we occupy for change.
Everyone understands this. Everyone around the world understands this because they're affected. I mean, the economies are globalized.
20 years ago, many people from South America has to leave their countries, but because there were no jobs over there. So they come here, and now they find themselves in this country struggling even worse than they were struggling in their original country.
It doesn't matter what color you are, where you come from, your race, your creed. It just doesn't matter. We're out here for such a larger purpose, and it's far from racial differences.
There is no place safe right now. So that's the issue right now. That's why the people is uniting and getting together to live in the world that they dream.
Demonstrations are going around Israel, Greece, everywhere. So for the first time in the world, have we had world demonstrations? So there's something really out of balance.
It affects the world because everything that happens in America has an impact in some other country in some way.
Occupy Wall Street organizers called for October 15th to be a global day of change. Protests and demonstrations spread all over the world. People in more than 1,000 cities in 82 countries took over streets to join in the global protest.
Tens of thousands of people gathered in Rome, where the rally turned into a massive riot.
Like Occupy Oakland, police used tear gas, but also water cannons on the rioters. Over 100 people were injured. Other European protests were more peaceful. In Madrid, thousands took part in a demonstration at Puerta del Sol Square. While in Germany, about 9,000 people marched through the streets of Berlin and Frankfurt to protest against corporate greed. And in London, more than 2,000 protesters assembled in front of St. Paul's Cathedral. Australia and Asia were also inspired by Occupy Wall Street. Hundreds of civic groups and labor activists held a series of rallies in South Korea. In Tokyo, they organized anti-nuclear petitions. Demonstrators in Hong Kong brought tents for a long-term occupation. Occupy Jakarta had about 800 protesters, and down under they were chanting human need, not corporate greed, in Sydney. Within 2 months, Occupy Wall Street in Zuccotti Park has inspired movements all over the world. This is Małgorzata Wojtunik.
As we've reported, the protests at Occupy Wall Street have been largely peaceful, but there have been clashes with police. And when that happens, who's there to help?
As the Occupy Wall Street movement enters its 3rd month, police and protesters continue to struggle to find the balance between protected speech and protected streets. Standing between them are the watchful eyes of legal observers, individuals volunteering their legal expertise to protect the people's right to protest. Lorna Peterson is a civil rights attorney volunteering at Occupy Wall Street in New York.
Well, what legal observers do is appear at protests. They're there to watch what's going on, take notes, and try to ensure that First Amendment rights are protected during protests.
The National Lawyers Guild is a volunteer organization comprised of lawyers, law students, and paralegals. It's dedicated to protecting citizens' rights. In New York, over 200 guild members take turns volunteering at Zuccotti Park.
There are arrests at the protest. We try to make sure that people have our phone number and can get in contact with the guild lawyer. We do immediate jail support for people who have been arrested.
Abi Hassan is the mass defense coordinator for the Guild's New York chapter. He oversees the operations at Zuccotti Park from the Guild's headquarters near Wall Street.
And this is an unprecedented time in recent history in terms of the volunteers and the people who want to get involved. We have students from, I'm sure, every law school in New York City who are volunteering. And the bread and butter attorneys for this type of work are usually criminal defense attorneys, but we have people, labor attorneys, civil litigators, private, solo practitioners coming out and getting involved.
These volunteers will be put to good use as the Guild anticipates First Amendment litigation across the country.
What we're seeing with this movement is a whole new set of challenges.
Noah Kinningstein is another legal observer at Zuccotti Park. He's ready for those litigation challenges.
The cases haven't come up yet in court, but we're prepared, the National Lawyers Guild is prepared to represent everyone that was arrested, basically. That's our commitment, that's what we do, and that's what we're going to do.
I'm Samantha Stewart for 219 West.
As the Occupy Wall Street movement goes into a 2nd month, what is really going to come out of it? Is anybody listening in Washington, and how will it affect our economy? We're here with 2 writers who have been covering the developments from 2 very different perspectives. Peter Beiner, columnist for the Daily Beast, also Joshua Brown, who writes the Reformed Broker blog and is an investment advisor. Gentlemen, welcome to 219 West.
Thanks.
I'd like to begin by talking about the beginnings of the Occupy Wall Street movement in September. The heat started to rise just about a week after Obama's jobs bill announcement, and Peter, you wrote that announcement really didn't do enough in explaining where the economic crisis came from. In fact, you said that Obama needed to explain how an inattentive, feckless government let Wall Street drive the economy off the cliff. Do you think that this signals a disbelief even from his base in his ability to change the economy?
Absolutely. I think what Occupy Wall Street represents is essentially the reemergence of a non-Obama left. Obama, I think, held the American left in the palm of his hand in the 2008 election and into 2009. And I think gradually over the last couple of years, the disillusionment with Obama has grown so much that people have decided to try to take events into their own hands.
Some people are characterizing Occupy Wall Street as sort of a liberal Tea Party movement. What would you say about that?
There's overlapping sentiments. I think both the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street tend to believe that Washington and Wall Street are in bed together to kind of screw the little guy or little woman. But I think the difference is that the Tea Party tends to believe that essentially Washington is running the show and controlling Wall Street, whereas Occupy Wall Street tends to see it from the reverse perspective. So they both believe that they're in bed together, but I think they focus their attention on different parts of what they consider to be this two-headed monster.
And is there a meeting place in between?
The problem is that even if their diagnosis of the problem may be the same, that Occupy Wall Street's national response is going to be government regulation. This has always been the conundrum for progressives. Even if you don't trust government that much, what other institution has the power to bring American finance and American corporations to heel? Even if people at the Tea Party are suspicious of Wall Street, as I suspect they are even more suspicious of Washington, so will be reluctant to give Washington the new regulatory authority that the Occupy Wall Street people believe would be needed to bring it to heel.
And Joshua, what do people inside what is called the 1% think about that?
From my standpoint, and I work with high net worth people all over the country, I can tell you that it's not necessarily a rich versus poor. There are plenty of people that would be considered wealthy or rich or whatever name you want to use that would say there is something wrong, there is injustice. Now, do they agree on every single sign being held aloft in Zuccotti Park? Probably not. But what Occupy Wall Street has done, I'm not sure on purpose or it's just happened that way, but what they've done effectively is they've not really had a clear, consistent message. It's so amorphous that it lends itself to everyone's frustrations.
Okay, and Peter, how do you see Occupy Wall Street developing as a social movement? What has to happen next?
I think the history of these kinds of things is that they can't stay leaderless and amorphous, that politics breaks out within the movement, which is essentially people start to contest for power, and also powerful outside institutions, whether they be labor unions or the Democratic Party, or even perhaps people from within the financial system who have their own frustrations and their own agenda, start to move into this movement. And then I think you start to see that it will lose some of the capacity to be everything to everyone, but also perhaps be focused and tap into some of the institutional power that already exists.
Okay, and what is this going to mean long-term politically? What will the impact of this movement be?
The political frustrations, I think, are going to wash over the political system and change it. The kind of stability, parity, 50-50 politics we've had between the Democratic and Republican Party, I think in some ways are going to change as the result of this. You can see politics all over the West is changing because of the sense of deep economic misery and government austerity programs. So I think this is going to have a profound long-term impact.
Okay, and how about economically? Do you think the financial markets are going to see some kind of major change as a result of this?
I think mainstream interest in Occupy Wall Street will grow. If the economic data continues to deteriorate, there'll be a lot more empathy. However, we just printed a third quarter GDP number of 2.5, which was a 2.5% growth, which was ahead of expectations. And maybe it's a coincidence, maybe it's not, but media attention has waned on the doings in Zuccotti Park. And in fact, it's almost been more of a let's ridicule what's happening there type of thing. So my sense is if things get much worse, Occupy Wall Street, the movement will grow. I don't think that the Democratic Party will be able to leverage it necessarily, just because the most powerful politician in the country is the president. So how could you be an anti-government movement, which they claim to be right now? So I think there's a lot still unknown. I still think it's very early.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Peter Beinart and Joshua Brown, for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Brandalise Gonzalez. New York City's economy, immigrants, and changing times. Those stories coming up. When you bought clothes a few years back, chances are they were made here in New York, probably right here in Chinatown. But rising costs, going abroad for cheap labor, and then 9/11 left Chinatown's garment industry looking quite shabby. Today, it's hanging by a thread.
In Chinatown, you'll find plenty of clothes made in China, but that wasn't always the case. In the not-so-distant past, a lot of clothes sold in New York were actually manufactured right here in Chinatown. Just a decade ago, the area was the hub for some 250 garment factories. Today, there are fewer than 20. This is just one of the many economic effects from 9/11.
You had the Chinatown area in what was basically a frozen zone. No traffic was allowed in. The trucks had to come and pick up their finished goods. If they can't pick up their finished goods to bring them to the manufacturer, so the manufacturer can send them on to the department stores, that's the end of the business.
Teddy Lai used to own 5 clothing factories in Chinatown and was a director of a garment association at the time of 9/11. He didn't expect much help from the city.
Everybody that's south of Canal Street or south of Houston Street got affected, by these tragedies. And we have thousands and thousands of different kinds of industry in the city. So I don't think the city can emphasize on just garments alone.
Of the $2 billion from city grants for Lower Manhattan, Chinatown received less than half. Lai sat out federal funds and other grants specifically for 9/11 reliefs. He received some $800,000, but it wasn't enough to save an industry that was already struggling. Chinatown had over 700 factories in its heyday, employing some 13,000 workers. But as rent prices grew, factories began to leave. Then came 9/11, and then the recession. 61% of apparel manufacturing jobs in the city have disappeared since then, the majority from Chinatown. Some factory owners, like Lai, moved their business overseas.
I had been in Asia. I'd be able to produce a lot more directly with the retail stores.
Lai was able to get contracts abroad with big retailers like Tommy Hilfiger. The city proved more cost-effective only for manufacturing high-quality luxury goods.
Just walk the streets of Chinatown, look up, and more than likely, one of the buildings was once a garment factory with hundreds of employees. Today, most of the buildings have been turned into hotels, apartments, or office space.
If a landlord can evict the factory owner, and they could subdivide the floor into many smaller offices, they will get more income that way.
The disappearance of factory jobs has had an impact on other businesses in the area.
You have half the people, or less than half the people that you used to have going out for lunch, spending money.
There are now fewer than 2,500 garment workers in Chinatown, and the number may continue to decline as factory owners face another challenge: more educated immigrants.
The new immigrant don't want to work in a factory because they have more knowledgeable, they could speak better, they don't have to be bounded in the neighborhood of Chinatown.
Lai has since moved on from the garment industry. He now does insurance. Like so many others, he doesn't see the industry ever coming back.
The big company, for example, Walmart, Macy's, JCPenney, they could manufacture themselves. They don't need the manufacturer, they don't need the contractor. So how can the garment industry survive in New York City? Impossible.
Chinatown's factories may be hanging by a thread. For 219 West, Brenda Lise Gonzalez, Chinatown.
While manufacturing has practically disappeared in the city, entrepreneurship, particularly among immigrants, is helping to keep the economy afloat. For these enterprising new arrivals, New York is still the gateway to success, and they are still dreaming the dream.
Like many immigrants before him, Inaki Berenguer came to New York City for opportunities he couldn't get at home in Spain. With 2 friends, he founded Pixable, an online program that lets users combine photos from all their social networking sites into a single digital photo album. He and his co-founders wanted to make it in America.
A lot of people talk about making it happen here in the US and the American dream, that you come from somewhere else and you come here and you can make it happen. And it is kind of true.
While many U.S.-born small business owners are struggling through these hard economic times, immigrants like Berenguer are thriving, owning almost half, 48%, of all the small businesses in the city. Though this number seems striking, Dr. Richard Alba says this is nothing new.
The immigrants of 100 years ago, especially the Jews and to some extent the Italians, were also likely to go into small business ownership. In some ways, they kind of carved out, the story that the new immigrants are following.
According to a Kauffman Foundation report, immigrants have been outpacing Americans in starting businesses for years. In 2010, on a monthly basis, they were twice as likely to start a business than non-immigrants.
Historically, immigrants have also monopolized certain areas of commerce in New York City. A recent Fiscal Policy Institute report found that immigrants own more than 80% of laundry services, taxis, and grocery stores. Dr. Alba says the high rate of ownership is born of necessity.
Immigrants often find that they are disadvantaged in a variety of ways in the labor market of the country to which they've immigrated by their inability to be proficient in the mainstream language of the new society, their heavy accent, maybe also by their ethno-racial appearance. So that leads many of them to look for an alternative to employment.
But not all immigrants are marginalized. Berenguer, who has a PhD in engineering and an MBA from MIT, is part of a growing number of immigrants breaking into the high-tech sector.
Silicon Valley, for example, famously about a quarter of the entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley are immigrants. That's also a story here.
And the city is promoting entrepreneurship among immigrants in the tech industry. Last month, Mayor Bloomberg announced an initiative to provide immigration seminars for startups. Immigrants are also benefiting from city-sponsored business incubators, which allow fledgling businesses to share office space and resources at a low cost. Berenguer and his co-founders graduated from the Varick Street incubator. They were able to move out of the space in 2010 and have raised nearly $6 million in capital. He says the city's small business initiatives are paying off.
Like in our case, there are 23 people working here. We have created jobs and we have attracted talent from different people, from different places. We have people that came from Boston, we have people that came from California, we have people that came internationally from Argentina, from South Africa, from Spain. So it is an initiative that has results, and this is a very clear example.
What is also clear is the critical contribution that immigrants make to the U.S. economy. Some experts fear that anti-immigrant laws in other states may stifle potential economic growth all over the U.S. by shutting immigrants out. That is not the case here in New York. The state and city's policies towards immigrants like Berenguer show that immigrants aren't only making it in America, but making jobs for America. For 219 West, this is Kalia Laney.
New York City attracts not just immigrants, but millions of visitors each year. However, the foreign debt crisis is threatening the city's booming tourism industry. But have no fear, the Big Apple's leaders have a few tricks up their sleeves to ensure the city's resilience.
A Portuguese-speaking tour guide is a nod to New York City's efforts to welcome international guests. In fact, leisure and hospitality services are fueling the city's economy, even outperforming one-time powerhouse and economic engine, Wall Street. Now, city officials are banking on international partnerships to keep tourists coming to the Big Apple.
This past year, NYC & Company, the city's marketing and tourism group, launched innovative partnerships with 2 international cities. The first one was in March with the city of Sao Paulo in partnership with American Airlines. And then most recently, we launched a partnership with the city of Seoul in partnership with their national carrier, Korean Air.
Of the 48.8 million visitors to the city last year, travel from South Korea was up 10%, with 223,000 visitors. Brazilians accounted for 589,000, making the country New York's 4th largest inbound overseas market. These emerging markets have strong economies that are important to city tourism. Right now, they have a stronger currency against our weak U.S. dollar. This means travel to New York from Brazil and South Korea is cheaper, and tourists like Soraya Constefans come armed with buying power.
You can find very big stores like Giorgio Armani, Victoria's Secret. We have this, but here it's cheaper than there.
Tourists are spending big on retail, while local consumer spending is down. And luxury retailers on Madison Avenue are coming up with unique ways to attract international buyers.
The Key to Madison Avenue program was started in the spring of 2011 to reach clients from emerging luxury markets, specifically focusing on Brazil, China, countries in South America, India as well.
Tour and travel agents abroad hand out key cards that unlock a special website filled with promotional deals. 10,000 keys have been distributed so far, and 60 businesses, including the Surrey Hotel, joined the program.
The Key to Madison Avenue promotion has been fantastic for the Surrey, and what it's allowed us to do is really get access to some of the top travelers coming in. Our Brazilian guests typically book into our one-bedroom suite categories, which can go anywhere around $1,200 a night.
Partnerships with Brazil and South Korea are driving tourists to the city. But international economic unrest could spur a global recession that could negatively impact New York's tourism industry, since the bulk of our tourists come from across the pond in Europe. But former chief economist for New York City, John Tepper Marlin, is optimistic.
Governments of France and Germany are very committed to keeping the union together, and even though we may frown at what's been going on in Greece, I am optimistic about that being settled too.
International tourists, especially from China, are buying up luxury hotels and condos all over the city. Add in the fact that banks are beginning to loosen their purse strings and they're lending money again, tourism in New York City is expected to boom exponentially. And if the experts are right, and we don't fall into a double-dip recession, Mayor Bloomberg may just get his wish of 50 million tourists by the year 2012. This is Tammy Cozier for 219 West.
New York City is considered the retail capital of the world. The bad economy and slow sales have forced companies and landlords to come up with new ways to do business. One solution is something commonly referred to as here today, gone tomorrow. It might just change the way we shop.
More than 1,000 people came to the opening of this shop, Cheeses of France, in Manhattan's Soho neighborhood. Crowds sampled and bought dozens of hard-to-find gourmet French cheeses. It was a huge success, but the store closed the next day. It was planned that way.
I would love to come back and be able to have those cheeses. It is nice that it's here for a day because it really makes you appreciate it.
The store was a pop-up shop. This was the most successful one-day pop-up shop held by Open House Gallery. The company calls itself a pop-up concept lab because it provides temporary retail space to businesses interested in creating unique experiences for consumers. Founder Jonathan Dow says pop-ups have ballooned in popularity in recent years.
What we're seeing this year is the year of the pop-up, a lot of people are telling me. So many companies are doing pop-ups because they realize the bang for the buck is there.
The sluggish economy during the last few years forced many stores to close. The retail vacancy rate in the city climbed to a record level of nearly 7% in 2009. Real estate advisor Mo Puri says landlords struggle to find permanent tenants.
In a tough economy, if you can't find space, then a pop-up is a great alternative to that landlord.
The economy has improved, but vacancy rates remain stagnant. As landlords scramble to fill spaces long-term, many real estate brokers are trying to educate them on the value of pop-ups. Open House doesn't just rent their space out, it provides an on-site manager, free PR, and social marketing. Clients pay $7,500 a day for 4,600 square feet of space. Compared with average retail rents in the city, the company's one-shot deal significantly cuts retailers' costs. Pop-ups were once just seasonal stores like Halloween and Christmas shops, but now these stores are opening year-round. Even internet companies are renting retail space. PayPal, the online payment option site, is opening a pop-up next month to demonstrate and sell its smartphone technologies.
It gives the retailer an opportunity to test a market or test a demographic before they sign a 10-year, 15-year commitment to a certain location.
Cheeses of France spent over a year planning for its one-day occupancy at Open House's retail space. The shop's creative director says they relied mainly on social media sites like Twitter to advertise the opening.
It creates a much bigger buzz for a very short period of time. We've had people today during the event essentially tweeting like, oh my God, you guys aren't going to be open tomorrow. I was like, no, we're not open tomorrow.
Dow says the more interactive and creative a pop-up is, the better for the bottom line.
In order to get your message out there, you have to be original. People need to come in and touch and feel something.
Dow believes pop-ups will eventually take up a large segment of all retail stores, but others think that if business picks up, pop-ups might disappear.
If the economy gets better over the next 5 or 10 years, the cycle will be to doing permanent deals, which will kind of decrease the availability of stores for pop-up.
Right now, Open House is one of a kind, but Dow hopes more entrepreneurs follow in his path with the belief that pop-ups are here to stay. This is Elise Estrada for 219 West. That's it for this month's edition of 219 West from the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. We'll have more stories next month from all of the 5 boroughs. From all of us here, I'm Elise Estrada. Thank you for watching.